Welcome to the Bonhoeffer Show with Bill Hull. The show about stuff most people try to avoid, but can't because it controls their lives. Religion, culture, and politics. Why does Bill Hull host this show? Because he and Bonhoeffer hoisted a few brews together in Berlin. Nope. That never happened. Is it that Bonhoeffer's book, The Cost of Discipleship, both challenged and changed Bill as a young man? Well, yes, that is part of it. But it's primarily because Bonhoeffer called us to a costly discipleship, and there has never been a time when such courage has been more absent or desperately needed than now. Bonhoeffer famously said, "Christianity without discipleship is always Christianity without Christ." The Bonhoeffer Project is committed to turning leaders into disciple makers, because if leaders fail to create disciple-making movements, then we have failed. So, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. He's still tall and good-looking, and yes, he is wearing German cologne. He's acquired a few more underlying conditions, but direct from his underground bunker in Long Beach, California, the man who once told Don Henley, "You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave," Bill Hull.
Welcome, and thank you, Steve Simmons. Today, that hideous strength, a phrase that or statement made by C.S. Lewis many years ago. And referring to something hideous means we don't like it. It's a negative. But so to govern means to rule or preside over a nation, a state, or a town. And some do it with the greatest of care to empower a free people to exercise their will. The underlying premise of such governance is that the human will have been created and granted by God. The human will has been created by God, and it should be left, it should be trained, but it should also be governed, not only, but primarily internally rather than externally, even though external has a part to play. People, therefore, thrive when the governor, now I can say the governor or the leader of a state or any kind of association or group of people, leads with knowledge that humans are best left alone to govern themselves with their inner strength and character. But in C.S. Lewis's fictional space trilogy, the third volume is named That Hideous Strength. It is a work of social criticism. It challenges the totalitarian impulse of societies and leaders to socially engineer human nature. In that sense, it is similar in theme to a more popular work such as Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Orwell was concerned that people would not be free to speak, that their lives would be monitored, and that propaganda would rule the day. And of course, you would be tortured. Who can forget that scene from the film 1984, where Richard Burton, I believe, is playing the interrogator, and a famous British actor whose name escapes me right now, John Hurt, that was his name, John Hurt, plays Winston Smith, who is the primary character in the film 1984 and in the book, of course. And he says, "How many fingers am I holding up?" And he says, and he's holding up 4 fingers. And so he says, "I think you're holding up 4 fingers." And the man said, "Why not 5? Aren't I holding up 5 fingers?" And he was still holding up 4 fingers. And he kept ratcheting up the machine that would cause the pain. And until finally, Winston Smith says, "Okay, you're holding up 5 fingers." And the idea is that tyranny, essentially, how many fingers am I holding up? As many as the state says you're holding up. And this is essentially what part of that hideousness that strength comes from is what is portrayed there in Orwell's 1984, but in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, it's essentially different. He says that people will be amused to death, that people will be so caught up in the amusement of life and in the enjoyment of life and the pleasures of life that no one will even read a book. In Orwell's, you burn the books, and the books are plenteous in Huxley's world, but no one even wants to read one. And so essentially, whose world are we living in? More of a Huxley world or more of an Orwellian world? And I would say somewhat of a mix. The present pandemic will very soon, and I mean relatively soon, in a few months, will become endemic. COVID-19 will become commonplace. It will be ever present like the flu and the usual viral suspects that will break through our herd immunity and the vaccinated on occasion. But putting aside the extremes that we must wear masks, some people want us to wear masks until every last case is snuffed out, or there is no pandemic advocates. There are people who say there's no pandemic. That's just made up, or don't wear masks, they don't work, or let live and let die, or hooray for herd immunity crowd. There's people like that. There's extremes. But human behavior will adapt. Airlines and public transportation will undoubtedly require certain behaviors and restrictions that were before considered unacceptable or even unconstitutional. What I think promises to become even more hideous will be the lust of some leaders for power to spill over into a soft totalitarianism. Totalitarianism means to govern the total realm of citizens' everyday life, issuing edicts based on their own ideology. And so that will be part of the temptation of government, which is always to overreach. Now, many leaders deserve, I guess you might call a lockdown dunce camp, and must be the original signers of the hypocritical oath, saying one thing and doing another. And the press has been filled with these examples of leaders who say one thing and then do another. To the hardworking scientists, we say thank you for your work and all the studies, but stay in your lane, because we don't really need you then to jump off that platform or that springboard and become philosophers or become politicians, because the politicians are who we elect in order to make the decisions, to take science, to take the needs of individual peoples and try what's best for our country and make the best decision there. That's really what, and like them, hate them, ignore them. The people we elect in a democratic republic are the people that we depend on in order to make the best possible decisions. So I recall laughing the first time a good friend told me that Siri was listening to my conversations over lunch. And I told him, of course, she is programmed to hear my voice and respond to the sound of my voice, but it doesn't really mean anything. Then one day, Siri started talking to me and interrupting me in my conversations when I wasn't asking her to. And then I realized that some algorithm was listening and recording my words. Subsequently, reputable news sources have reported that China is already practicing what Orwell wrote about in 1984. All citizens are assigned a social score. If you don't think and say the right things, you may lose your ability to travel. Your score goes down. You could lose your job. This already is being practiced in less intentional ways in the United States through big tech and their benign surveillance. I call it benign because essentially they're just trying to monetize information. That's really the primary motive of all of this research. Because, like, for example, if you watch a John Wayne movie on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, by 1 o'clock, Amazon's trying to sell you a set of spurs and a saddle. And that's just the way it is. And then, that's so convenient, actually. Oh, it's amazing. Who knew I needed socks? And something I haven't needed now in about a year, by the way, socks. My sock drawer has to be aired out periodically because that's the only time they get opened. And it's probably too much information. You didn't want that. It's primarily used to make shopping easier for me. Everything from my clothes and films to travel interest and reading habits. Technology in the wrong hands, though, is a hideous strength that can manipulate thoughts and decisions. Tyrants want control in order to create their dystopian paradises where they flourish and the populace obeys. Please see the former paradise called California. That's where I reside. That's where I live, where now 1/3 of the population lives at the poverty level. Companies desire to make our lives easier with their products and make our behaviors more predictable. Big tech has already proven they have a monolithic political viewpoint that they favor and will, without apology or guilt, coach the society toward. The question that naturally comes up here is who has an interest in moving the culture away from a more biblical worldview? Because that's how, again, my biblical worldview begins with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and everything is in alignment with that. And so when you have a biblical worldview, who is the prime mover? Who keeps the glacier moving forward? You think about it. Why does the push always seem to be away from what the Bible teaches? Why is it away from the 10 Commandments? Why is it away from what the Bible prescribes about human sexuality, about human conduct, about how you treat other people? Why is the wave of culture, the spirit of the age, why does it keep pushing away from what the Bible teaches? Why doesn't it come back the other direction? Once in a while it does, but very rarely. The culture is composed of major institutions as universities, public education, media, technology giants, the arts, movies, music, sports, history have been used to build a great country and culture until they were hijacked by forces that have used them for a more sinister purpose. And those who would wield this hideous strength are trying to build a fool's paradise, because you see, the paradise doesn't really exist. Utopia means no place. And so when you go try to create a paradise, a fool's errand, utopia is no place. It becomes a dystopian rather than a utopian culture. And that's what worries me. That's what we are facing. And so who would be so heinous to try to destroy everything that's good for us? Well, there's only really one person that I can think of that's behind all of this, and his name is Lucifer. What can we be done about it? We have to go to the source of evil. Now, here is the hard part. We will lose before we will win. I think the Bible actually teaches this, that if you've read the Bible and you are familiar with it, is that things get worse before they get better. And an astute person already knows that much misery comes before the promised return of Christ in triumph, and he won't and can't win without the spilling of blood. That is how difficult it is to eliminate evil. It doesn't go down easily. And there's a related philosophical problem to this, and that is, if we had a perfect world once and it became imperfect, what makes us think that heaven will always remain perfect? These are the kinds of things that we really have to think about and discuss. I know it's not something that everybody talks about on the sidewalk in front of your house, but it's the kind of thing that somebody has to think about. I don't even know if there's an answer for us at the human level. But right now that I have totally depressed you, we're going to take a break so I can be hosed down. And then I'll introduce my wonderful guest host for today. So let's listen to what Steve Simmons has to say. And as I always say, do whatever he tells you.
We turn leaders into disciple makers. That's the mission of the Bonhoeffer Project. But before we can turn you into a disciple-making leader, we need you to be in a cohort. A cohort is a 1-year, 10-meeting, book reading, praying, wrestling, writing, planning challenge that has the potential to change you and thus redirect your life. Interested? Here's the process. Go to our website, thebonhoefferproject.com, and complete the application form. We will contact you. We will then help you select the type of cohort that's best for you. In person, online, or online school, which is asynchronous, so it's not affected by time zones and anyone in the world can access it. Oh, and training is now also available in Spanish. In the meantime, subscribe to the show, read one of Bill's books, and send us a question you want Bill or some member of the Bonhoeffer team to answer. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back. My guest hosts today have been with me for the last 2 weeks, and today is the third time, and we're just so excited to have them back. Cindy Perkins, who is Executive Director of the Bonhoeffer Project, one of the best leaders I know, and Dr. Jim Thomas, or JT as we call him, lead pastor of First Baptist Church, Fayetteville, Georgia, and member of our national leadership team, and one of our cohort leaders in the Bonhoeffer Project. So welcome both of you to our program today, and you've heard what I've had to say, and I apologize. But so given the situation that we've talked about here, and moving from that hideous strength, which is Lucifer, and his program to destroy all things that God has built and made life good for us. What's your opinion about why do evangelicals like the rapture so much? And who would like to start?
It's an easy question, right?
Yeah, right.
No, I think for several reasons, evangelicals like the rapture so much because it is an escapism. It is getting out of this world, right? That's the basic rapture theory, is that we're raptured out. We finally get to go to paradise, heaven. And I think that's attractive because we are still, like you said, we're still living in this in-between time, and it's a hard in-between time. And, even over the last year, over the last month, we've seen those hard times. And where does Christianity and where does truth fit into all of that? It's just easier to get out of here, And so we long for that idea of rapture, even though that theology or theory may be a little misplaced in its origins. So, I think anytime we talk about eschatology, it has to tie into our gospel. And when we start to understand that, and we talk a lot about the gospel and the different types of gospels that are presented in America and around the world today. And, when we present a forgiveness only gospel, it's about escapism, right? If I pray a prayer, I can go to heaven. I got to get out of here, right? Instead of, no, I'm entering into new relationship with God, into his kingdom, and eventually his kingdom is going to join this earth. I mean, if you read Revelation 21 and 22, N.T. Wright does a great job with this in Surprised by Hope, to talk about the coming together of heaven and earth and this eternity we will spend with Jesus. But it's not escapism. And I think this idea of the in-between time becomes that time of formation and mission and purpose in the kingdom of God that was introduced and inaugurated by Jesus in his life on earth, his death, resurrection, ascension. I think that's very, very important. So I think we have to be very careful of this idea of always trying to get out instead of being about the purposes of Jesus in the now.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Cindy.
Well, I think a lot of this comes back to, I talk a lot about fear because when I'm dealing with folks in the church, that's what I see. There's so much fear. And I think it comes back to fear of the unknown, right? So I was thinking about that this morning and just kind of walking through the greatest generation is dying off. These are the people who were born in or around the Great Depression. And I was thinking about the fact that in this country, we may have suffered some, but we haven't suffered like that, right? We've never seen bread lines. We've never seen rationing in my lifetime. The generation that saw that during the Depression and during the war is now dying off because they're in their 90s and 100s. And so we think about that and we're fearful of that because we haven't lived hard things. We've all lived some hard things, but comparatively we have not, right? As a whole, there are people among us who have. So don't let me discount that, because I know plenty of people in my life who've been homeless and those kind of things, and that is hard. But as a whole, as a Christian people, we haven't. But when we go back, and JT, I agree with you, it's an escapism. I want to escape the hard stuff. But Jesus said that suffering is coming to his people. If we don't consider ourselves able to suffer for him, then we're not going to really understand what he brought for us. And so none of us want to suffer. We don't want to hurt. We have an aversion to pain. Hence the opioid addiction crisis in our nation. We just have an aversion to any kind of pain. And when we look and know that what's coming, right, on maybe on this nation now is going to be painful, we just don't want to do it. I heard somebody to say today, I don't know if I want to keep doing this if we have to go to that place. Maybe I'll just be done.
Keep doing what?
Keep living, keep walking,
Really?
Keep doing the next piece, right? I don't want to do the hard thing. And so I'm like, we've got to learn to do the hard things. And that's why we have such a love affair with the rapture, because that says, well, I'm out before it gets really hard.
Yeah, it's pretty self-serving. I mean, let's face it. And I know as a pastor, I was really a lot of pressure was put on me to teach the rapture. And I said that essentially I was open to what the rapture idea is. And I know the biblical argument for it and against it. And we had another pastor and I who one Sunday debated it back and forth in front of the people instead of having a normal sermon. And I took the position of the rapture theory, and the other guy took the post tribulation concept. And a bunch of people wanted me to fire the other guy because he didn't believe in the rapture. And I said, well, in the end, I don't know if I care much about which one it is, And so that didn't help me either with that congregation. But, I think that I think we're soft. I think that, when you think about and I don't want to be misunderstood here, I believe COVID's real. I believe COVID's a problem. I follow the rules. But the point is that there are certain generations of Americans, going back to what Cindy said, that if they said, there's typically across America, there's a 0.1 or 2% chance that you will die of this. They would not have considered that a plague. I mean, as far as rating plagues in history, that would not get in the top 10, maybe the top 20 or even 30. This is just something that's kind of a bad virus that some people get sick and die from. And so I think that when they say America is exhausted right now, I think, it's exhausted publicly, and that leads to and people who are more fragile. And this is not an accusation, because some of us are more fragile than others. That fragility makes you more susceptible to these kinds of stresses, and so, but part of it, I think, has been the therapeutic culture. Kind of what do you think's fed into this, if we want to call it softness of the American public?
I think we haven't had enough challenges. I just think you learn to be strong by working out the muscles, right?
Right.
So if I'm going to the gym, if I'm only lifting 1 pound, I'm only going to get that much. I don't go to the gym, by the way, just for the record.
Just for the record, yeah.
Just for the record. But if I'm going, because my friends would laugh at that statement from me, but I understand the concept. But if I'm only lifting 1 pound, I'm only going to get that much muscle tone, right? But if I go to 5 pounds or 50 pounds, now my muscles are going to grow. And so I think these are spiritual muscles that we have to exercise, and they can only be exercised through suffering and perhaps persecution. And that's a really unpopular thing to say. I've had several say, so you're saying that we have to go through persecution? I'm like, well, Scripture kind of shows that and says that. So if we're soft, it's because God has not allowed us to go into that space, maybe.
Well, and it's an assault on where we get our joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the misconception is that joy comes from comfort.
Yeah.
Instead of joy coming through suffering, which is honestly more biblical in the end. And that we identify with Christ's suffering. We join him in his suffering, as Paul would say. Paul even wanted that so that one day he could join him in his resurrection. And so our joy being found in comfort pushes us back, again, that drift back into get this over so we can get back to comfort, has weakened us as a society. It's weakened us as a church. And I think the idea of the rapture, what Bill brought up, is, we focus a lot in the evangelical church on the gospel, meaning a point of transition into salvation, and the rapture as a point of transition into eternity. But there's the deficit of discipleship in between. And we don't talk a lot about that because it's almost management of the church to get them to the end times, instead of realizing this coming into relationship with Christ, as John 17:3, Jesus said, is coming into the kingdom. It's coming into eternal life. Now, how do we live that eternal life out now? And it becomes a lifestyle.
Yeah, I was thinking about, when you start looking for the most common denominator in a church, oftentimes under the false guise of being sensitive and being pastoral, leaders tend to lower the bar until they get down to something like I'm breathing, as the bar. So, and anything else is not compassionate.
Right.
Anything else is not caring. Yeah. And I remember one of my favorite preachers, Helmut Thielicke, even though I never heard him preach because there are no tapes of him or tapes or videos or anything of him. He was a German preacher that lived in the first, about the middle part of the 20th century, maybe the earlier part even. And wherever he would go, he'd fill up cathedrals and churches, wherever he pastored. He was just terrific speaker. And one of the things that he said was that he preached to the congregation he wanted to have, not to the one he did have.
Right.
And I think that's different than what I was told. Well, a lot of people say, put the cookies on the lower shelf. And I say, well, okay, maybe once in a while you put a cookie down there, but you don't want to really have people, their diet be the cookies. You want to aspire to something with people and to create an expectation. And that's really what we call in Bonhoeffer Meeting 3 is about the call to that higher expectation, about an environment of expectation. This is what God is expecting of us, not that other thing. I mean, we love you and we'll keep you around, but essentially this is what he wants from us. And so I think that what I'm talking about here is there's a tendency when things get tough to either separate yourself, like a rapture idea, or appeasement, which go back in your church and just keep it in there, shut up and pray.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is figure out a way to respond. And I think that both of you have been saying it in all the programs we've done together, is that we are to intentionally make disciples, because what's our product? And that's the product. Well, we're going to take another break right now and listen to what Steve Simmons has to tell us, and we'll come back and have some really good things to talk about, like, for example, what 2021 looks like for the Bonhoeffer Project and how people might get involved with us.
If you want to expand the disciple-making movement, then share the show with your friends and colleagues. Hey, it's easy to subscribe. Simply go to iTunes or to our website, thebonhoefferproject.com. Then click on The Bonhoeffer Show. Once you do, we will keep you updated with the Bonhoeffer Project's events, new materials and books, as well as the larger disciple-making movement current news. You can also access previous programs. And be sure to read Bill's weekly column, which is posted on the website. Remember, ask questions. Bill's answers are guaranteed to give you herd immunity, increase your IQ, and cause you to experience waves of euphoria. Well, not really, but his answers are really good. And now, let's get back to the Bonhoeffer Show.
Well, welcome back. Here we are again with my terrific guest host, Cindy Perkins, our executive director, and Dr. Thomas, JT as we like to call him, our director of training. So here we are, and what we'd like to, here's the way that if people read about how evil gets out of us, that hideous strength is, when the 1,000 years come to an end, Satan will be let out of his prison. He will go out to deceive the nations, called Gog and Magog, in every corner of the earth. He will gather them together for a battle, a mighty army, as numerous as sand along the seashore. And I saw them as they went up on a broad plain of the earth and surround God's people and the beloved city, which of course would be Jerusalem. But fire from heaven came down on the attacking armies and consumed them. Then the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the fiery lake of burning sulfur, joining the beast and the false prophet. There they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Now, that is something that we can't do. God alone can do that. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a glorious time, but also it's going to be a troublesome time. And I think that whether you believe in 1,000 years come to an end, and some people believe that the 1,000 years is a literal thing, that Christ will indeed rule from Jerusalem for 1,000 years. And I respect that belief. And what it means is that when Satan then finally, what it really proves, the millennium idea, a literal millennium idea, proves this, that no matter how perfect of an environment you have, there'll be, Isaiah talked, there'll be no slums, people will live to be in their hundreds. I mean, life will be peachy keen in the millennium. But in the end, still, Satan hasn't changed. Evil hasn't changed. And there's only one way to get rid of it, and that's get rid of it. And that involves death. So it's one of those great philosophical problems, much too rough for modern sensibilities. But speaking about modern sensibilities, that beautiful segue, what about the Bonhoeffer Project? And why is 2021 going to be a great year to get into a cohort? And I have my own thoughts about this, but I'd like to hear from the two of you. Why is this particularly going to be a great year for it? And let's start with you, JT.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great year because I think 2020 has really revealed some holes in the church. It's stuff that pastors and leaders have known for years. There's something missing. I'm doing the programmings, I'm preaching, I'm writing sermons, I'm putting time in, I'm doing trips, I'm doing all this stuff, and everything's shut down. And we realize that there's a deficit in the church, and that deficit is in really forming people in the image of Jesus through disciple making. And I think 2021 is going to be a great year for the Bonhoeffer Project, because what the Bonhoeffer Project offers is a deconstruction of yourself and your idea, your previous ideas, and a rebuilding of your gospel and your disciple making strategy, so that you'll be successful for the kingdom of God in the future. And I think this provides an opportunity for pastors and ministry leaders around the world to be able to evaluate ministry, to take steps forward, to have creative and relevant ideas in helping to grow people, not just to grow organizations. And I think that's going to usher in a whole different paradigm of God doing something very special and powerful in the local church. So I think because of where we've been, this 2021 is going to provide an incredible opportunity for pastors to dream forward, if you will, as they walk through this process.
Well, that's good. That's great. Cindy.
I think that where we are as a nation, as a world, really, and I think about what God's doing in the Bonhoeffer Project across the world, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think right now there is an excessive spiritual openness, right? This whole pandemic that has affected the world has caused people to look and say, okay, what if I die? What if? And so they're going to be looking to the church for the answers. And the church doesn't necessarily have the answers, because they haven't figured out how to take the individual and put the individual in that place. And that's where I think the Bonhoeffer Project comes in, is we train our leaders to be able to create that culture. And sometimes it's a culture shift. Sometimes it's just they've started with nothing, and we help them to be able to create that culture. And it's not just necessarily church leaders. I think there is such an open opportunity for lay people to step into this place, people that God is calling out, because I do believe that he is calling out his own from within the ranks. There are people that my friends can touch and talk to that I, in the positions that I'm in, will never get to speak to. And so I think there's a large contingent of people that need to know, okay, I feel like God's calling me, but what's he calling me to do? And we know that the ultimate thing that he has called us to is discipleship, is to be disciples who create disciples. And we know that it's hard work. And so the Bonhoeffer Project is going to come along and help people figure out how to do the hard work of making people disciples of Christ, because I think we've realized, many of us in Christian world, not just church world, but Christian world, have realized that what's coming is going to get more difficult. We're not going to be able to be soft. And so this is the place that we have to build.
Well, both of you have made some really excellent points. And I was thinking about how frustrated, confused, frightened, unsure of their footing leaders might find themselves in right now, not really knowing what they have as a church, that they have to rethink the whole thing. And that's what we do. We do why. Why is it we are there as a church, and what is that about? Well, it's why is make disciples, the gospel rather. It's the good news. It's a story. It's the greatest story ever told. But what is that story? And we talk about separation of conversion from discipleship, and how that has made making disciples almost impossible in the church. Then what is a disciple? What are we in business for? What is the product? And can we define it clearly enough to know if we've made one? And then how do we do it? What's the plan that's in alignment with that? And who are we? What kind of person does it take to make disciples? It takes somebody willing to own it, to roll up their sleeves, to get their hands dirty, It takes a person who is willing to invest 4, 5, 6 years in implementing this thing, going through the pushback and the confusion and the attack of the enemy. You know, Colonel Nimrod McNair, who was a famous fighter pilot during the Second World War and also flew in Korea, he said, you know, when you're getting the most flack, that you're over the target. And so that's how we know is when we're getting a lot of flack, you know you're over the target. You know that Satan is throwing everything he can at you. And that's what discourages a lot of us. And so it has to be in your DNA. It has to get in you because of that. Well, I want to thank, and now sign up. That's what we're really saying is go to our website, thebonhoefferproject.com, sign up for an application for a cohort. You can look at the list of cohorts that we have coming, that they're not all there, but we have people who will talk to you and guide you and coach you into the proper place. And there's 3 different ways in which we do our cohorts. And it's a time to find some comfort in a community of people who have like-minded and who really want to go to the same place. All right, so thank you to my guest host today, Jim Thomas, Cindy Perkins. And until next time, follow Jesus and he'll teach you everything you'll ever need to know.
Well, we hope that the show wasn't too bad. Jane Hull wants everyone to know that if anything Bill said was offensive, she feels your pain. If you were upset by anything Bill and his guests said, well, mission accomplished. At the Bonhoeffer Show, we value irreverent, satirical, and generally inappropriate behavior. But when it comes to fulfilling the Great Commission, we don't mess around. Remember, subscribe. We promise. No private jets, no white suits, and definitely no toupees.